It was just unbelievable. It'd blister your face. It would put your eyes out. Well, I guess I can't describe it. It was just constant, just that steady blow of dirt.
The Dust Bowl marked a shift from prosperity to disaster. Farmers had the right to use the land, but they should have paid more attention to the responsibility to care for it. This crisis revealed how the misuse of rights can lead to environmental collapse, reshaping how we think about the balance between rights and responsibilities.
In the 1800s, Americans believed in what they called manifest destiny. This was when Americans thought that it was their God-given right to expand westward. John L. O'Sullivan originated this so-called manifest destiny, the catalyst for westward expansion. In addition to the idea of manifest destiny, the Homestead Act was a big part of the beginning of America. The Homestead Act, enacted during the Civil War in 1862, provided any adult or intended citizen who had never borne arms against the U.S. would get land. This led to a rapid expansion, with consequences that would soon become evident.
Before the Dust Bowl, life in the Great Plains was thriving for many farmers, as the land was fertile and agriculture was booming. The population saw significant growth, with residents increasing from about 5 million in the 1900s to over 10 million by the 1930s, mainly due to the promise of fertile land from the Homestead Act. According to the National Drought Mitigation Center, farmers produced record wheat during this time, contributing approximately 40% of the nation's wheat supply by the late 1920s. In 1928 alone, wheat production in the United States reached nearly 1.2 billion bushels, much of which came from the Great Plains, often called the breadbasket of America. The National Library of Medicine explains that many farmers expanded their operations, with the number of farms in the region rising to around 1.6 million by the 1930s, frequently investing in mechanized equipment to increase productivity during this period of economic growth. They relied heavily on favorable weather and stable crop prices, conditions that would soon change dramatically with the onset of the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression.
In the 1920s, with the coming of tractors and mechanical farm implements, farmers on the Great Plains plowed up huge tracts of land once covered with grasses that held the soil in place and helped to keep in moisture in the topsoil. Without the grass cover, the wind could lift dirt particles into the atmosphere, where they were carried east by the prevailing winds. The State Historical Society of Iowa states that during the summers of the 1930s, little rain fell, creating drought conditions in Iowa and across the Midwest. Extremely high temperatures topped 100 degrees, sometimes for weeks at a time. Crops withered in the field, and again, the soil was left with no cover to prevent the topsoil from blowing into the air. The result was that the huge clouds of dust formed. They would be so strong that they blocked the sun, which created darkness and limited visibility even during the day.
As far as you could see, there was a dust storm coming right towards you. This giant wall just coming towards you. And you still had the feeling, whether you would admit it, that something was going to run over you and just crush you.
April 14th, 1935. A day that etched in the memories of those who had lived through it. Black Sunday was the most devastating dust storm in American history. People described it as a black blizzard, as a soundless, windless storm, just being an immense boogery cloud. The Liberal News said on April 15th, 1935, that some people thought the end of the world was at hand when every trace of daylight was obliterated at 4 p.m. For those who caught in its grip, Black Sunday was a day remembered for terror and despair. Elders struggled to breathe. Children cried. It was a stark reminder of nature's power, of the consequences of human choices. The billowing black cloud struck Amarillo at 7:20 o'clock, and visibility was zero for 12 minutes. Amarillo Daily News, April 15th, 1935.
The damaging environmental effects of the dust storms had not only dried up the land, but it also dried up jobs and the economy. The drought caused less agriculture to be produced, leading to less income for farmers, and consequently less food on the table for their families. Tens of thousands of displaced families, dubbed Dust Bowl refugees by the press, journeyed west to California in search of farm labor jobs in an event named the Okie Migration. The mass of migrants that arrived in California did not receive a warm welcome from the state of California. They viewed the Okies as culturally and socially inferior, backward, and uneducated. Hostile treatment from the Californians, not the ideal life migrants had imagined.
The Dust Bowl of the 1930s was one of the worst environmental disasters in American history, displacing millions of farmers and devastating the Great Plains. In response, the U.S. government implemented key policies to address the crisis, highlighting the balance between the rights of the farmers to their land of the livelihoods and their responsibility to care for the environment. These efforts reflected a growing awareness that government intervention was necessary to protect both individual rights and the long-term health of the land.
President Franklin D. Roosevelt stated in 1936, after witnessing the devastation of the Dust Bowl, he described families who had lost their wheat crops, lost their corn crops, lost their livestock, lost their water in their well, and emphasized the urgent need for federal relief. In response, his administration launched programs like the Soil Conservation Service and provided direct aid to struggling farmers, helping to restore the land and prevent future disasters.
The Emergency Farm Mortgage Act of 1933 also provided financial relief to struggling farmers, preventing foreclosures and helping them maintain their livelihoods. The Taylor Grazing Act of 1934 regulated grazing on public lands, aimed to fix and rescue overgrazed areas that had further contributed to the land degradation.
The Resettlement Administration, created in 1935, provided much-needed support to displaced farmers, offering assistance and relocated to areas less affected by the dust storms. This includes sending known photographer Dorothea Lange to provide visual evidence that there was a dire need for assistance and that the FSA could provide that assistance. According to the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the conditions that the FSA photographers documented helped to raise awareness of the dire situation in which many Americans found themselves. Various agencies and programs created by the New Deal would provide aid to the nearly 2.5 million people who had migrated from the Dust Bowl region back in 1940.
Hugh Bennett, known as the father of the soil conservation, led efforts to combat the Dust Bowl in 1935. While testifying before Congress, he pointed out a dust storm darkening the sky over Washington, D.C., providing the crisis urgency. His advocacy led the Soil Conservation Act, creating the Soil Conservation Service, SCS, to promote sustainable farming. His work helped restore farmland and emphasize farmers' responsibility to protect the land. Therefore, the Soil Conservation Act of 1936 was vital in promoting sustainable farming methods. It encouraged farmers to adapt crop rotation, plant windbreaks, and counter-plow to prevent soil erosion. This was critical in helping to restore the overworked, drought-stricken that the land had become vulnerable to the massive dust storms.
In an interview with Marko Zaninovich, a farmer whose family has been farming for 50 years, we ask, how can we prevent a dust bowl from happening again?
I answered your question about could it happen again, and I absolutely think it can. If your generation doesn't start taking proactive measure to say, hey, enough's enough.
Yeah.
We got to have food to eat.
In an interview with head of agriculture of Tejon Ranch, Trey Irwin, we asked him what new techniques are used to prevent a dust bowl. Our farming practices and equipment are more practical and advanced. The irrigation systems are also more efficient. We also use cover crops in fields that we are rotating crops to keep soil stable if there is a windstorm. Plus, the cover crops are put back into the soil for organic matter to build up soil profile.
The Dust Bowl was not just a natural disaster, but a stark reminder of the consequences that arise when rights are exercised without responsibility. Overfarming and drought led to one of the most devastating environmental crises in U.S. history. But most important lessons emerged from this dark chapter. The government's intervention through programs like the Soil Conservation Act demonstrated that recovery was possible when both the lands and its stewards were given the care they needed. The Dust Bowl reshaped how we viewed the relationship between rights and responsibilities, underscoring that with the privilege to use the land comes the duty to protect it.